What the city is talking about. This is Montreal Now on News Talk Radio, CJAD 800.
That is James MENNIE. He is over at the Montreal Gazette. So, Jim, you want to start by talking about François Legault rewriting Quebec's history today, right?
Well, rewriting Quebec's history, basically, I don't think he wrote anything down. I think he just basically said Quebec history is about the Quebec nation, and the Quebec nation is white, Francophone, and Catholic. I think that pretty well sums it up.
Uh-huh.
You knew the writing was on the wall when they inaugurated this place. And, it said, the Museum of National History. Not a single invitation had been sent out to any First Nations people. There
That's
are 11
unbelievable.
First Nations in Quebec, but nobody was on the guest list. So then you have François Legault turning around and saying, it really begins with Samuel de Champlain, maybe Jacques Cartier, but it's clear. I mean, I don't have to tell you. I don't have to hang around watching the development of the so-called museum. That you're going to see these gallant white Francophone Catholics carving out what I'm sure they'll describe as a civilized nation in the midst of the wilds of Quebec, undergoing the oppression of the English for decades, and yet somehow managing to survive. It'll be a story of survival, and everyone will be a villain except people who are white, Francophone, and Catholic.
Yeah.
And I cannot stress this enough. This is what François Legault's nation, or perhaps more accurately, his tribe is. And if you're not a member, too bad, so sad. You don't get. Not only are you not going to be in the museum, except as anything as maybe a bit player, an extra in this great movie that is Francophone, white, Catholic Quebec, but also you'll probably have a second part as a villain, as an oppressor, as someone who was holding white, Francophone, Catholic Quebecers down for centuries.
All right, here is the Premier. Here's his comment.
This museum is to talk about our nation. And I think that the 11 nations of the indigenous people wouldn't like to say that it's the same nation. Of course, there are things that we did together, but we're talking about the Quebec nation.
Maybe you should have asked them first if they'd like
well,
to.
When the guy turns around and goes, we're talking about our nation.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Aaron, but I didn't get the impression he was talking about me or my ancestors or you and yours.
Yeah.
So, Jacques Cartier, Samuel de Champlain, maybe they'll try and recycle the reputation of Dollar d'Erzonmo. You never know. He had a holiday named after him at some point in Quebec, until historians back then, who perhaps had a little more rigor, turned around and said this guy was nothing more than a bushwhacking, claim junkie criminal who got killed when he tried to hijack a load of furs, and all of a sudden it became the Fête des Patriotes, as you may recall. But yeah, apart from that, I mean, really, and remember, this entire project, this so-called museum, the National Museum of Quebec, is to cover up the fact that the Espace Bleu, which I guess were smaller satellite propaganda outlets for the CAQ government, fell through because they were over budget and behind schedule.
Meanwhile, another CAQ member here, high-profile member, Pierre Fitzgibbon, today raising a few eyebrows, suggesting he may not be around for very, very much longer. Jim, what's going on here?
Land sakes, Aaron, was it only yesterday we were talking about how there was a fin de regime feeling around this whole government, how people seem to be heading towards the doors, not stampeding, but, in a calm and quiet manner, people were sort of getting up from their seats one by one and leaving. And I wouldn't care. I mean, Pierre Fitzgibbon, God love him, I owe him a huge debt. I think to a certain extent this show owes him a huge debt, just because he's Pierre Fitzgibbon, as I call them, Mad Dog Fitzgibbon, the bane of the National Assembly Ethics Commissioner, the guy who said, you don't like my lack of ethics. Come and see me next week. You're going to like him even less. The guy who went out to pheasant shoots and stuff like that, and completely unapologetic. But the fact is, he's not just a cabinet minister. People seem to forget he was a super cabinet minister. He is the minister of energy. He's the minister of the economy. He's basically in charge of anything that theoretically is going to be linked to Quebec's economic future. And now we're learning that the guy is playing coy when he's asked, well, are you even going to finish your term? He never committed seeking another term. But in the next, a little under 2 years now, the idea was he was going to hang around. Well, he's not giving a straight answer to that anymore. And that, I think, is a reason for a lot of people to have concerns, because it's not so much, Pierre Fitzgibbon, he's free to go. The question is, and we are painfully familiar with the depth of Coach Legault's bench, who's going to replace him? That's where we are. And right now, it's not looking very good. I mean, I can see why Pierre Fitzgibbon might want to leave, because I think he knows deep down inside that half of the agenda that he's been assigned to complete will not be done, simply because this government doesn't know how to do stuff. But all that said, I don't see why that should be our problem, but it is going to be our problem, because, as I say, way too much power has been centralized in too few people in this government. And clearly, when some of them get fed up and it looks like they're going to go, we don't know what the next step is going to be. And we're talking about tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah. Seems to me, too, at one point, Jim, maybe even still, he'd be talked about as a possible successor to François Legault.
Oh, I think, back in those days, and right now, to me, the whole idea of François Legault even tolerating having a successor would be so alien to his nature. This has been, is, and will always be a one-man show. And when that show, packs up and goes home, that's it. Mm-hmm. The only legacy the CAQ government will have for Quebec is the damage it did, the legislative damage it did while in office, and actually took this jurisdiction to make it one of the first in North America to fundamentally legalize discrimination.
Let me move on from that while we still have a second here. So who's this Liberal MP who we apparently have never heard of, who yesterday called a couple of so-called experts on language in Quebec, what did he call them, extremists, and then said they were full of it? Who is this guy?
Yeah, and this is Francis Drouin. He is a francophone Ontario MP. He describes himself as an ardent Ontario defender of Bill 101. And he has a seat at the official language standing committee on official languages. And these two guys come in. One's a sort of a self-described researcher. The other one is from an organization that is referred to as the Association Cégep Français for Quebec. Gee, I wonder what they do for a living. And the thing is, they're in there, and they're basically suggesting to the standing committee that if you attend classes in Cégep in English, you run the risk of actually living the rest of your life in English. At which point, Monsieur Drouin says, "Well, this sounds kind of extreme. You guys sound like you're off the mark here." And then, as you say, and he said it in French, and I'm not even sure if I can repeat it in French on radio, but he said basically, "You're full of it, okay, but in good Quebecois." And if you ever listen to the tape, it's worth it. It's good Quebecois French. You can't mistake this guy for being some Anglophone cracker from out west who just doesn't like the Frenchmen in Quebec. This guy, plus français que ça, tu meurs. But the other thing as well, Aaron, that's freaking him out. This guy is the president of an international association of francophone parliamentarians, and now, of course, the Bloc Québécois, they were having kittens yesterday after this occurred. They didn't know what a Fisher cut. They were absolutely terrified. Because here's a guy who's basically out loud saying what a lot of people in Quebec, and not just Anglophones, and certainly a lot of Francophones are outside of Quebec are saying, is that, and this is a quote that gets missed in what Drouin said yesterday. He turned around, he looked at these two guys, he goes, "Do you mean to tell me that Quebec is becoming anglicized because of McGill and Dawson? Because of the big bad English in Quebec?" He says, "France is becoming anglicized. It's a trend all over the world." So he's not debating whether French is in decline, but I think he just put his foot down when someone comes up and has their own convenience theory, which would lead to the tabling of, God help us, of legislation like Bill 96, which today I love it, Aaron. Jean-François Robert's saying, you know what, if you want to attend classes in English in a cégep in Quebec, you've got to speak French. He said that out loud, and nobody turned around and started hitting themselves in the head with a board saying, "What planet am I at?" This is where we are. And if they're having a problem in Quebec, if the English colleges are maybe even end up firing people because of Bill 96, Tom Yeh, he says, that's because there's more work that needs to be done. As I say, the next 2 years That's my real fear. It doesn't matter who stays or who goes, Aaron. What matters is how much damage they do and whether it can be repaired once they're gone.
I shook my head when I hear him talking about that today. And what was the quote? He said, if it's difficult, talking now about CJEPs now in the French, if it's difficult, it's because it's important.
Yeah, exactly.
What the hell does that mean?
If it's difficult, it's because you don't know what you were doing, and the legislation was written with a Crayola on a piece of foolscap. That's why it's difficult, because even the people who made the laws don't know how they work. But this guy gets away with it, and they all get away with it. They have this lopsided majority in the National Assembly. Only now, I find, is the Francophone press corps up there starting to grow up and actually, hold their feet to the fire. Although and that's what I love about this Drouin story, because he doesn't fit into that slot where it's an Anglo, it's a Quebec basher.
Yeah.
I mean, he was, of course, accused of being Quebec bashing. But the fact is, you want to get a real sermon on how full of it Quebec's language intelligentsia are. Talk to any Francophone outside of Quebec, and they will give you an earful, because really, Quebec is just for Quebec. They don't give a damn about the future of French as long as that French is in Quebec and voting for their party.
James MENNIE at the Montreal Gazette. Thank you, Jim.
Demain.